World War I. The conflict in which you can gain 500 meters of territory for the small price of 50,000 men. A conflict with a resolution so unsatisfying it ensured a Second World War. If there's any sort of meaningful conclusion to take, the following 40 years show us the Treaty of Versailles wasn't harsh enough. Let's make a tier list of the belligerents, shall we? They'll be ranked on how I think they performed, which depends on my mood, to be completely honest. Also, I'll do this in alphabetical order because I like to be anticlimactic. The Emirate of Asir, a state so obscure you probably didn't even know it existed. Having barely fought the war against the Ottomans, they get the C tier, aka the participation trophy tier. Austria-Hungary. Was there a more dysfunctional state than this one? Not only was the invasion of Serbia in 1914 a disaster, they lost about half their troops in it, were pounded by Russia and needed the Germans to save their asses. Likewise Romania, at first. Even the Italian front was pretty even. As the Germans themselves believed, they were shackled to a corpse. But hey, at least Austria-Hungary did eventually beat Serbia, Montenegro and Romania. Eventually. Austria-Hungary barely escapes F tier. Brazil, the country which joined the war for the sole purpose of distracting the populace from government corruption. Never change, Brazil. It's not like the Brazilians did anything noteworthy. Another participation trophy tier. Belgium, the Roger Rabbit of World War I. In face of the German threat, they fought valiantly. They were still obliterated, but they had spirit. And their country wasn't fully occupied, meaning they fought this war to the bitter end. Given what I said, maybe too harsh, but B tier. Bulgaria, you know what? They did pretty well. Their entry in the war contributed greatly for the fall of Serbia, screwed over Romania, and helped the Central Powers actually have territorial continuity. It all eventually fell apart, of course, as that happened with all of the Central Powers, but gotta give it to the Bulgarians. They did pretty good. It's even more impressive when you consider the fact that at the start of the war, Bulgaria was still recovering from the disastrous Second Balkan War. They just did way better than what they reasonably should have. A tier. China. The OG China. The Republic of China. Did the Chinese do anything particularly noteworthy? No, they did nothing. Not even the Chinese territory of the Shandong Peninsula occupied by the Germans was taken care of by the Chinese. The Japanese took care of that. So really, nothing at all. And you know what that means. Off note, did you know China was the only country not to sign the Treaty of Versailles? The treaty for this was due to having received no territorial concessions. Even the previously mentioned Shandong Peninsula was given to Japan, which, to be fair, they were the ones who occupied it during the war. And the Chinese government just took it, which led to protests erupting back home. So, in order to save face to their people, they refused to sign the treaty. France. The reputation the French have for being cheese-eating surrender monkeys is definitely unfair. And if there's a war which earned them this reputation, it's World War II, not World War I. In World War I would say they were actually one of the better sides. That being said, Le Panton Rouge, c'est la France. A tier. Germany. Truly a class of their own. The reason why the Central Powers lasted as long as they did was Germany. Bulgaria kinda did okay, but really, it was Germany. Someone needs to check the Germans' backs because they carried their team. Took out the Russians, it was more like the Russians took themselves out, but you get the point, and gave both the Brits and the French a pretty solid run for their money. Incredible they actually had a realistic chance of winning the war. Only nation to be in the S tier. Greece, they did okay. It took them a while to decide which side they joined. In fact, they nearly had a civil war over it, but once they did contribute to their allies. Mostly by opening up another front which mostly didn't change until nearly the end. All in all, B tier. The Kingdom of Hejaz, a country which apparently wasn't that into participating in World War I, but they discovered the Ottomans were plotting to remove the king from power. Allegedly. Any expert on this can tell me if this was some British scheme or not, because to me, it definitely smells like it. Anyway, they got into the war under certain conditions the British would have to fulfill, which they only implied would do, number one rookie mistake when dealing with the Brits, and contributed towards expelling the Ottomans out of the Arab Peninsula. After the war was over, surprise surprise, the Brits only half-assedly did some measures in favor of the Hejazi kingdom, largely keeping their promises unfulfilled. Shocking. As for their contributions for the war, I'd say B tier. Italy. Mighty Italia was amazing in World War I, truly the team carriers of the Entente as soon as they joined the war. They did wonderfully, just didn't have enough battles of the Enzonzo. Clear as day S tier. Okay, now seriously, yeah, a lot more accurate. Japan. They did okay with what little they could do, basically taking over all of Germany's stuff in the Pacific and helping the UK with some errands here and there. B tier. Montenegro. Well, there isn't much to say about them. They were barely involved in the war until the remnants of the defeated Serbian army retreated through it to get to Italy. The Austrians then used the opportunity to knock Montenegro out of the war, launching a campaign which accomplished just that in 12 days. To be fair to Montenegro, seriously, what could they realistically do? Gotta say, D tier. The Emirate of Nejd and Hasa. I am probably mispronouncing this. That's basically the Saudis before they conquered the rest of Arabia. Not much to say except participation trophy. The Ottoman Empire. Imagine being so bad you fail at every single front, with one notable exception, that it makes you want to commit atrocities you deny to this day. So not only are you a poor participant, you're a sore loser as well. Easy F tier. Portugal. They got into the war because Britain told them to do so, and like the little British puppets they were, they obliged. A slightly ironic event to occur considering the Portuguese Republic, installed 4 years before, was based on a sentiment firmly against the British control over the Portuguese monarchy. See the anthem? Against the cannons March March? That was meant against the British. Didn't do much during the war, mostly engaged in minor operations in both the Western Front and Africa. The most notable event for Portugal was the Battle of Lali, where the Portuguese got absolutely destroyed by the German forces. It may be my home country, but it really didn't do well in this war, so D tier. Romania. Initially neutral and not really clear which side they were to join, with the king actually supporting joining the Central Powers, though the country's elites were in favor of joining the Entente. After receiving an ultimatum, which in reality wasn't an ultimatum at all, they joined the war on the side of the Entente after the Russians had launched a reasonably successive offensive. And then they got blasted. In fact, Romania got blasted so hard, they were defeated and had to concede some of their land. Then they had the audacity to redeclare war 1 day before it ended. No doubt in my mind, the worst performer in the war, even worse than the Ottomans. F tier without any doubt, but redeclaring the war just before the end was a Chad move, I'll have to admit. Russia. It was the case of the big baddie revealed to be kind of a paper tiger, a gigantic army found to be grossly underarmed and undersupplied. The Battle of Tannenberg early on marked the actual state of the Russian army behind the facade of the large numbers. But it's not like the Russian entry in World War I was a complete disaster. The Russians were successful in both the Ottoman and Austrian fronts, it's just their supply problems proved to be seriously crippling. Just look at the Brusilov offensive. It was initially successful but had to be stopped due to supply issues. Eventually it all collapsed, including their monarchy, and after some very dragged out discussions, you can thank Trotsky for that, the war finally ended for Russia with the loss of a lot of territory. Still, not the total disaster of some other countries. D tier, above the others though. Serbia. Given they were surrounded by enemies, their uniform and equipment were ill prepared for the war, and that they continuously repelled Austrian attempts at conquering them, they did pretty great. I mean, they still collapsed eventually, but being surrounded on all sides, that was kinda predictable. Solid A tier. The Kingdom of Siam. Participation trophy. United Kingdom. The UK. The Brits. Also, for the sake of clarity, I am putting the British Empire also in this entry, including Australia, Canada, India, yada yada yada. Why? Mostly laziness, to be completely honest. The UK and its empire had to wear a lot of hats for this war. They had to fight on 3 different continents after all. Wait, is Papua New Guinea in Asia or Oceania? Oceania. 4 different continents. And barring a few disasters here and there, some Gallipoli, they mostly did well. They helped the French hold back the Germans in the Western Front, pretty much won in Africa, and won most of their fronts against the Ottomans. It was pretty much the only country in the world which legitimately had a global projection, and it showed. All in all, A tier. The United States, and this is the country where we end things. Considering the average watcher of this video is probably American, what I'll say is, if you think this is a war where you really showed you were a cut above the rest, you are sorely disappointed. Don't get me wrong, the American introduction to the war was very important on the Western Front. They just churned 2 million troops into the war like it's no biggie. But the generals in charge just did the same old World War I tactic of run into the trenches and try not to die to the machine guns and barbed wire. With predictable results, may I add. If you really want to see a war in which the United States came to chew bubblegum and kick ass and never run out of bubblegum because Americans never stop producing, wait until World War II. Till then, B tier. And that's it. Shout out to all the vermaboos who ever so kindly paid their money for this video. And if you like this video, consider commenting and subscribing as well, that would be great for me. If you wish to support me on Patreon, there's a link in the description. This was Spectrum, and I'll see you around.